oh crap, it's huge, it's impersonal, and it hates us and it wants to eat us. So let's try to pretend like it doesn't exist. I am very happy to sit here virtually with Richard. And the ostensible reason we are here is to talk about science fiction. But really, and this is the secret reason, is this is the warm-up session for our next hate-watching session of Rings of Power.
Are we gonna do that though? Are we gonna do that?
I don't know. We probably have to watch episode 1 and then see.
Oh, I don't know. Like that trailer did not fill me with warm fuzzies.
But wait, it's got Tom Bombadil, Barrow Whites, Blue Wizards, and Entwipes. Because if you can't write, you have to just throw the kitchen sink at the thing, and then everybody
definitely like, all words.
Oh, you're not excited? I'm so not excited too.
There's, honestly, one of the things that I think we probably didn't talk about, because our last review was just a slow descent into madness, but I think one of the things that we didn't really talk about and this is something that I've been kind of noodling on, is that the way that I think that if you're adapting Tolkien, there needs to be a certain amount of minimalism involved. Minimalism is not even the right word, but something more like measure, or restraint, something like that. Like if you read The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien does not drop everything. He's not like, I've been working for 4 decades on this amazing legendarium, and I'm just going to drop it on top of you. Just like, bam, here's every word, here's every name, here's every little bit of history, and you're going to get the whole thing. I mean, let's be honest, that's sort of what Robert Jordan does in the first Wheel of Time book, when he's like trying to make you feel like he's got this world with all this history behind it and everything, and he's imitating Tolkien. I'm not trying to rag on Robert Jordan, he's fine, but it's definitely like a trap for Tolkien imitators, myself included, that you fall into when you don't really know what you're doing. Is you're like, I should just dump as much as I possibly can, but Tolkien stretches out, especially those first 2 books, in Fellowship of the Ring, like stretches out things, so you don't actually really even kind of get the full sense of weight in history until you're at the Council of Elrond, and then you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on here. And but the current attitude of Hollywood, and now with Hollywood we can include like places like Amazon and Netflix, is very much like sort of like rush, because they're pushing for the exact opposite effect of what Tolkien tries to do. What Tolkien tries to do is to like build, it's like building this beautiful piece of music that's like, okay, we're gonna like layer in these themes, and then we're gonna build to that, and there's gonna be this beautiful crescendo, and then we're gonna kind of wind back down. And what modern, like, like the high budget, what do you even call like a high budget miniseries? It's not a blockbuster, but it's a, like everybody's attempt to redo Game of Thrones, right? Is instead pursuing basically a fix. Like, so you got to be like, you got to tune in next time because you're going to see Tom Bombadil. Next season you got to tune in because you're going to see this other obscure thing from the Legendarium that we're going to bring in and be like, this has never been seen on screen before, right? And that's how it feels to me, and it feels very exploitive.
I like your use of the word minimalism, and I've been thinking about this in that, okay, so Tolkien, in a lot of ways, his style is okay. So it's emblematic of a time in Western history. Think of Rachmaninoff, both in the classical music sense and also in the church music sense.
In Texas, we say Rachmaninoff, but anyway, continue.
Yeah, you're of course absolutely right. So he's a synthesis of like all of the trends that Russian classical music has been leading up to, and he kind of raises them up in an apotheosis. But he's also the apotheosis, and this isn't. I don't necessarily think this is the case, but this argument has been made by people much more intelligent than me, that he is the point at which Russian church music reaches its height, and in terms of its development from roughly the baptism of Russia to the fall of
right. Sure, of course.
And after that, it's been kind of chaotic, and there isn't a line yet because everybody's picking up the pieces, right? But that moment in history, which is right, the 40s, 50s, that whole period, the first half of the 20th century, right, is the moment at which we reach certain heights as everything is exploding, right?
Yep.
It means you have the capacity to be rich, to have long sentences, to take your time, to have 1,000-word long novels that are still restrained, right? But ultimately, you wouldn't call Tolkien somebody who is minimalist, right? I mean,
Right. That's why I was sort of like, I was like, that's not quite the word, but measure. I think measure is a good word.
yes,
Yeah.
and everything after that is this like uh, attempt to do it, but it's just too much, right? And same thing in music, like classical music has gone off a cliff since then, and it's the minimalists, by the way, who are kind of
Right.
bringing it back, at least to a popular consciousness. People
Yeah.
like Arvo Pärt. And I've been thinking about this in terms of writing because Martin Shaw kind of exudes this anti-Tolkien thing, and so does Jonathan in some ways. Um, this need to restrain yourself with language when you're telling stories. Now, Martin doesn't do this when he's writing his nonfiction. His sentences are very long and they go on forever. And sometimes in some of his books, I'm like, "Good Lord, man! Like, can you please find the period?" But when he's retelling the stories, it's a very different style.
Yeah.
And it's very restrained. It's keeping back a lot of the excess um, that you find in that
Is my
time period.
sad 2-year-old too loud for everybody? Do I need to
No, you
go?
can't hear him.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Great.
And anyway, this is a very friendly space
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
two-year-olds.
Yeah.
And the barbarians will barge in at some point during this conversation.
They will.
They will, and they will come, and they will probably be naked. So we're all okay with that. It's fine.
Great.
So I'm wondering, like, do we have it all? And along with that, and by the way, people, we will get to the point here, but this
Yeah.
is how we talk, so it's fine. Um, there are people that have been showing up on my radar that are basically saying that stop looking at the past and the forms of the past, because it's over. What you need to do is start looking at completely new, different forms. And people in Russia talking about like fifth and sixth wave sci-fi, and what kind of storytelling that's going to mean. It's going to be, and there's some really interesting stuff going on there. But a lot of it is restrained. A lot of it's minimalist. A lot of it is how much can you do by holding back. And I've started to experiment a little bit with that in my own writing, and it's very hard for me because I write purple prose, like really, that's my default. So I'm wondering if this is the moment where this is, and this fits with Reno Loro saying that the best adaptation of Tolkien would be Wes Anderson.
Yeah. I still don't know how I feel about that particular idea, but I sort of get what he's saying in a certain sense. I think.
You could see. I don't think it would be the best, but an aesthetic, not an aesthetic, but an approach to
Yeah.
creation like Wes is not somebody who's uh, excessive. He's ecstatic, but he's not excessive. I don't think, because it's very restrained within um, a visual palette that he has chosen, but it's very formulaic, right?
Right.
And formula is restraint. So
Right.
I could see a small Tolkien adaptation that would focus on on individuals that wouldn't have these vast sweeping vistas, but would instead have, like, you know a scene of woodland with mist and people kind of walking through it, but not from above with the drone flying over it, but with the camera kind of close up, and almost like those funny fan films that were made in the early 2000s, like the Young Aragorn. Did you ever see that one? It
Yeah.
was pretty good.
Yeah. The one about, I know they made one about his parents, which I think we watched at some Tolkien event that I
Oh
was
yeah,
at. We watched
that
it
might be the
together.
one. That might
It
be the
was
one.
it was really, honestly, it was kind of delightful.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where the thing that I really like about Martin's approach to storytelling is that um he is sort of going back to the things before Tolkien.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the thing to do right now. Sort
Yeah.
of like Tolkien pulled off what he pulled off partly because he came at the end of a
Yep.
received tradition.
Yep. Yep.
And then the world died. And so now the thing that we're trying to do is to kind of like pick up and figure out where do we go from here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that you got to go back to like the roots of the mountain and kind of pick up on, the kinds of stories that would eventually produce a Tolkien, and just understand that he might not be you. And I say this as somebody who I have an insanely ambitious
Yes.
fantasy project, which is the main thing that I do all of my work with.
Yep.
And to be fair, a lot of people have really enjoyed it. So, I'm grateful for that. But also, like, I very consciously avoided writing a novel.
Yeah.
Because I find I can't bear myself whenever I try to write a novel in this particular setting. Like, I just can't stand myself.
Yeah.
And
Then you
so,
shouldn't do it because nobody's
yeah,
gonna
I
like
just yeah.
it.
But what I found is that role playing games are a really good medium for exploring it, and that and short stories to some extent, and then mostly through the writing. And this is the thing that I'm really mainly focused on for that particular setting. It's the world under starlight, for people who don't know. um, is writing, basically, there's probably a fancy word for this, like, in-world texts, like
Mhm.
found texts.
Mhm.
And that seems to be
Textual
the
ruins.
yeah, textual ruins, except that I don't want ruins,
Yeah. You want the actual thing. Yeah.
which is why I'll never finish anything, because if I start writing something, I'm like, "Oh, he needs to reference this older author." Now I have to stop and spend 2 years writing the things the older author wrote so that I can come back to this.
You're writing a palimpsest.
I am, and you'll never get anything done this way, but it is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun, and
Well,
it does make, I think, for a really rich experience when you have, through the medium of role playing games, you have people sort of coming in and participating in the world, and sort of then layering their own stories into it, and that has been like really beautiful and really really compelling.
Yeah, I think there's something. I mean, Martin talks about how in-person storytelling
Yeah,
of his kind is going to be very important. But somebody who else who's talked about this, how direct experiences or storytelling
yeah,
in places where you are with other people is gonna be increasingly important. And that kind of storytelling, in order to do it well, you do have to immerse yourself in more ancient forms. And yeah, yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. Anyway, one of the reasons why I'm thinking about this is because as we're talking about here, fantasy as a genre is not doing very well, not just in the post
mm,
Tolkien age, but particularly in the 21st century. It's the things that are getting published now are getting published almost exclusively because they have um, cutting edge ideological things to say about the world, and they're doing it in fancy dress and cool costumes with well crafted magic systems.
mm.
Which, fine, go ahead, do that. That stuff's not going to last. Sorry, guys, it's not that's not
Yeah.
literature, and it's not going to be talked about, much less thought about in 30, 40, 50 years. Forget it. It's not going to happen. Oh, John's talking about metamodernism. Here we go. John
I
likes
never
the word
totally know
modern.
what people mean by that.
Don't get him started. We'll have another conversation where we'll have
Okay,
John
okay,
come and
okay.
talk to us, and then we can talk about metamodernism, but not now. It's really interesting. It's fascinating, but not for today because we're going to just get lost. Although we'll probably talk about it tangentially, John, at least because we are talking about sci-fi. Because the thing that's really astounded me is that the genre that is not supposed to be about transformative things, but it's supposed to be strictly about, well, it is about sort of the um, moving the boundaries of the human experience, but it's supposed to be a tightly rule bound genre that is stuck within scientific um, possibilities, if not realities. Science fiction is doing ridiculous things when it comes to metaphysics and when it comes to considering the realities of the human condition in ways that are not just Star Trek like, because Star Trek and Star Wars, they're more fantasy than they are sci-fi, but in ways that are very unique to the sci-fi genre. Now, um, we both have thoughts on this, and before I get into my particular uh, diatribe slash rant, perhaps Richard, you would like to comment on this intro.
Yeah, well, so I'm more of a science fantasy than science fiction guy, but I really am a deep lover of the science fantasy genre. I would although Star Trek, especially like Deep Space Nine, does have more kind of fantasy elements, I would still put it more over on the side of
more than Star Wars, certainly.
Yeah, more over the side of if not quite hard sci-fi, like hard sci-fi that's been popularized,
There you
right?
go.
It's just,
Pop hard sci-fi. There we go.
it's
That
about,
rolls
I
right off
mean,
the tongue.
and one of the things that to me sort of makes the difference between science fiction and science fantasy is that very often science fiction is about the has a very deep humanism to it, and usually like a very optimistic humanism that certainly defined Gene Roddenberry's work on the genre, right? This idea that look at the things that humanity could be capable of if we got over all of these things that Richard likes and Gene Roddenberry doesn't. But anyway, that's not the point. I really am a huge Star Trek fan, and so like I don't hate it or anything. Like I quite enjoy. Part of the reason that I just enjoy Star Trek is because it's so much it's such better television than almost anything that's available now. I mean, you have these basically Shakespearean actors acting their hearts out on cardboard sets.
Awesome.
And you're like this is a terrible episode of Star Trek, but the dialogue is so much better than anything that's on like current television. Like it's not even close. It's just boggles my mind. But anyway, so but I love space opera as a concept. I love sort of science fantasy. I like Gene Wolfe a ton. I'm having my big Gene Wolfe year this year.
Oh yeah.
So I'm sort of like up to my arms in up to my armpits in epistemic uncertainty and unreliable narrators and everything else.
How far are you in the solar cycle?
I just finished the Book of the New Sun and Earth of the New Sun.
Okay.
And so,
do you hate the Earth of New Sun or do you love it?
That's a good question. I sort of wish it didn't exist. I don't
Yes.
hate it.
Me too.
But I'm just sort of like I'm really happy with the uncertainty of the ending of Book of the New Sun, and so like part of me wishes Earth of the New Sun wasn't there because then I wouldn't know what happened.
Okay, so you know how the Catholics were okay with medieval legends for most of their history, and then
Yes.
you have a guy named what's his name, Father Delahaye, a French Jesuit who decided to conclude a 400-year project of cataloging all of the saints' lives through the manuscript tradition, and as a result, ended up chopping off an entire arm of
Yeah.
the church's canon of saints because of because of not sufficient manuscript tradition, which
Right.
of course everybody from the beginning of the history of the church agrees that the reason we believe in saints is because there's something written about them that we can
Obviously.
that we can find in a
Obviously.
museum, so, or an archive. So obviously that's right. So then everything becomes this rationalized thing about how anything that's legendary is fake, and anything that's real has to be explained. You have to have a devil's advocate when you're up for canonization. You have to count the number of miracles. You have la, right? All this sort of thing. So the Earth of the New Sun is the 20th century Catholic Church, and the Book of the New Sun is medieval Catholicism.
I get that a lot. Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, please keep me in the medieval, please. I don't want to know how he changed water into wine. I'm not interested in how he caused storms to gather because he was angry. Like, you've just taken a Messiah figure that's very bizarre and unreliable, and kind of, is he really Messiah? I'm not even sure.
Kind of messed up. Let's be honest.
Kind of. And then you've made him just into a dude who can manipulate time. I'm like, dude, no, don't do this to me. Stop.
So I have long sun and short sun to go. So those
I'd love to hear. Okay, so when you're done, we have to get together and talk about this. Maybe just do a series on.
I honestly, I think that I apparently there was a Symbolic World Book of the New Sun reading club, and I just like came too late to the party. But I would really, I think it would be very fun to do like an Orthodox book of solar cycle.
I tried to do it with my patrons, but it was at the tail end of the fall of Western Christendom, so I fell with it, and then the book club died.
I'm sorry, the actual fall of Western Christendom,
well,
or like you're reading
everything
stuff
that's happening around us.
Oh, okay. All right, fair enough. I was like, there was a book that you guys were reading called The Fall of Western Christendom,
No,
or you
I'm
just
talking
mean the
about
actual history that
everything
we're living
around
in?
me. Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
But we need to get back at it. We need to try it again, because that would be really fun.
I mean, I found the books delightful, and it's sort of they're a good example of what is it? I found this differentiation a long time ago between ergodic and non-ergodic fiction.
Okay, explain.
So non-ergodic fiction would be something where you can pick up a book at the beginning and read to the end,
Yeah.
and now you've read the book.
Yeah.
Whereas ergodic fiction would be something that requires non-trivial effort to read through.
Yeah.
So I mean, a good example of something with non-trivial effort would be something like a newspaper,
Yeah.
where like you start the article and then it's like, all right, now you got to flip over to page 17 to get the rest,
Right.
and so it requires trivial work for you to kind of, and and there might be a lot of articles in there along a theme, but you have to read them all individually and then kind of like piece together how like your opinions about things for yourself.
Yeah.
And so ergodic fiction would be, and this is actually obviously the reason I like the idea is because it's the thing that I'm the most interested in doing with The World Under Starlight, is putting together, not trying to write a novel or even write like a sort of like, here's an encyclopedia for the setting, but instead to basically put together, here's a bunch of found texts from people with their own opinions that they may not always totally agree with each other, but it sort of represents this like found tradition.
Yeah.
And there are some interesting examples out there. Some of them kind of aimed at the YA crowd. There was a thing for a while where people were publishing like a book of like a box. Like instead of buying a book, you would buy a box, and the box would have all of these like letters in it, correspondence between people.
Cool.
And they'd be dated, but they'd be in there sort of jumbled and out of order. So you sort of pull them out, start reading them, and you'd have to actually sort of like kind of piece the story together based on all the evidence that's in there.
That's really cool.
Things like this I think are really cool. I mean, in some sense, like any epistolary novels are certainly like related to this.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah.
And in some sense, like epistolary novels are kind of related to this in the sense that they sort of like bring together an account where each part of the story is from one person's particular point of view, and you actually have to kind of synthesize all of those things in your head to get a sense of what actually happened.
Right.
And anyway, so Book of the New Sun is definitely a work of ergodic fiction where you have to almost read it through one time just so you can read it.
Yes.
And this makes it a really hard sell for book clubs, along with all the torture and the rape and so on,
Yes,
but
it is pretty dark.
but it makes it
the cannibalism
and the cannibalism, all those things. Just a good Catholic boy, I don't know what to say. But yeah, so those are the kind of the various things that, but I'm really interested in stories like that, and that's to me something that really draws me to a book. And I realize it's like a very niche kind of attraction, but
somebody sent me a meme about two people talking about Book of the New Sun and the glories of discovering it, and they were Orthodox. And one of the comments goes, oh, "I found my people. There are dozens of us."
There are literally dozens of us.
Orthodox fans of Gene Wolfe.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, Gene Wolfe is great.
So anyway, I meant to say I love science fantasy as a genre. I am a Warhammer 40K player, and I have a pretty good little Orthodox Warhammer 40K group, believe it or not. So anyway, I love but science fantasy as a genre is not really about humanism. It's about sort of like the failure of humanism, and that's why science fantasy settings tend to be always post-apocalyptic. Just sort of like after the great human project has failed, then ... the story begins.
Yeah,
and
that sort of thing's been happening a lot, and it's interesting that there are different iterations of it, but all of them are. What's fascinating to me is that all of them are talking about things that one would expect fantasy to talk about, things like enchantment, things like the ultimate purpose, not of the human experiment, which is a kind of a science fiction question, but of the human spirit, like what it means to be a human being, not by pushing it up against the alien or things like, but like actually considering it within an individual human person, and asking questions about ultimate fates and what's happening at the end, what happened at the beginning, what's happening at the end. So all of this kind of came together because I was reading a series by Adrian Tchaikovsky, who, by the way, I haven't finalized this, but I'm going to be talking to him.
Oh, yeah.
sometime soon. Yeah, which is going to be really interesting because the man is about as hard a materialist as you can imagine. So it's going to be not what I'm used to,
Oh,
but
yeah.
we shall have to see how it goes. Plus, he's of Russian extraction, so I think there'll be some fun in jokes
Yeah,
there.
I did sort of get
But
that from the name.
yeah, a little bit. um, so my first experience of Adrian Tchaikovsky, and most people's experience, will be Children of Time, which is a really, really, really good book. It's probably should be on any list of canonical speculative fiction if you want to talk about that. And what's fascinating about that one, although I don't want to talk about that too much, is that what he does really well is he humanizes the perspective of a race of sentient spiders at the expense of human beings. And you root for the spiders and you root against the humans, and you don't feel like you're doing anything that's against your team. It's incredible. It's very hard to do. It's very effective. It's one of the most imaginative pieces of
Sorry,
space
my
script
Warhammer
I've ever read.
hackles are up now. That thing isn't human.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really good. So a lot of people have encountered him through that. His most recent series is called The Lords of Uncreation, which is a great title, and the setup is interesting. Basically, there's a race of sentient moon-sized aliens that, because of the scale, you can't possibly have any sort of connection with them. Obviously, they're clearly sentient because they're acting according to an obvious will. They're not randomly moving about. How do we know this? Because they attack planets and they turn planets into works of art. They twist the fabric of the planet and cause it to go into these cool flower shapes and things. And anything they encounter that's alive, they twist it into these. So basically, they're leaving behind them not a graveyard, but a museum filled with beautiful works of art made from the leftovers of killed planets.
Wow.
And yeah, one of those
That's
planets
pretty
is
rad.
Earth. One of those planets is Earth. And the initial war with the architects happened in the past, according from the perspective of these novels. And the way that the war ended is that there's a latent psionic power in humanity that's come about probably as a result of evolution, and a few humans have the ability to communicate telepathically with other races. So this is a very necessary conceit, because if you don't do this, there's no way you can have the story, because the scale of difference between human being and planet-sized sentience is very difficult to make a story out of. So Adrian Tchaikovsky chose rather wisely to allow for the connection between mind to mind to be the thing that humanizes the whole conflict. So one of these psionically powered humans, who for some reason can no longer sleep and is not aging, which is weird, but whatever, is the one that convinced them to stop attacking humans, because he showed them, even though we're the size of insects compared to them, that actually there is a sentience here that you shouldn't be touching.
Yeah.
As the story goes on, it's like a ragtag kind of. It's a lot of fun. It's got elements of caper, elements of heist. The characters are all very quirky, very fun, very interesting. It's an okay series, but in the third book, what happens is you realize that these architects, the sentient planets, are not the bad guys. That the bad guys are somebody else behind them. And there will be spoilers to people, but it doesn't really ruin the effect of the story. So if you don't want to listen, plug your ears, but this is what we're doing here. So what it turns out is that these are accidental leftovers of the previous universe before it died its heat death and turned into this current universe. And they are at the heart of this universe in a place called Unspace, which is, it's really interesting. So there's real space and there's Unspace. Unspace has a series of what looks like transportation corridors, which allows you to travel effectively. It solves the problem of sublight travel, right?
It's the warp. or hyperspace or
It's
etc.
more like the wormhole thing, but it's basically you enter into unspace and you come out and you can plot it because there is an inherent structure to
Yeah, yeah,
unspace,
yeah,
even
yeah.
though unspace doesn't exist. Actually, it's not in the real. It's like it's something like dark matter to light matter sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So it exists, but not in the same realm. But you can enter it. The thing is, when you enter it, you're alone, even if you are with other people. So the moment you enter into it, your experience is of entering into the abyss and there's no one there but you and a presence. The presence doesn't exist, or so the scientists of that place tell you. But every time you go in there, it notices you and it starts to come up at you. And a lot of people, if they're not properly trained, end up killing themselves because the process is too, the experience is too traumatic. And the more the story goes, the more the metaphor, the dominant metaphor that's used is the ocean. Unspace, or rather space itself, is the ocean. And real space is kind of the surface level where you can see everything. And unspace is the depths. And what lives in the depths? The Leviathan lives in the depths, of course. So the presence is actually a Leviathan. And the Leviathan is being used by these leftovers from the previous universe, who are basically like the implication is not that they're the creators of the universe, but that they run things very much. And they hate sentience. They hate sentient creatures. They hate anything that lives. Does this sound like anything to you, right? I mean, this is starting to,
Yeah.
and the more this is happening, and they're using the Leviathan as their kind of like a lapdog that goes in and makes sure that sentient creatures don't reach the depths of unspace where they reside. Now they're alive, but they're kind of not alive because they're unspaced creatures with reference to real space, and they're kind of fading away because they're the vestiges of a previous time. They're kind of skeletal. They're kingly, but almost like like Nazgul, kind of like
Hmm.
there but not there, kind of existing
You
in a
say
separate.
skeletal, are they humanoid?
The way that they present themselves to people is a kind of mix between. It's a lot like the god Tash. So
Uh-huh.
humanoid, but with bird-like qualities, which is an interesting choice, I thought. Also, I'm not sure if it was on purpose, but it's evocative of the same kind of impulse. And so throughout this whole story, you're getting this kind of these metaphors that are much more mythic than they are scientific. And at the end, the main character faces them directly, and he ends up doing this switcheroo where the Leviathan notices them, and the Leviathan kind of turns on his masters, and it's kind of cool, and it works. But the whole setup of space is this vast cosmic nothingness that is inhabited by creatures from the deep who are animated by what is essentially a kind of um, malicious will that existed in a previous iteration of this universe and hates everything that is in this universe. What does this sound like to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's obviously very Lovecraftian.
Not just that, it sounds like it's not. It's I mean, Lovecraft is a very very good example, but
Yeah.
it sounds like the war in heaven. It sounds biblical is my point, right?
Um, okay. No, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Yeah, the it's funny because actually going back to Gene Wolfe for a second, there's this idea that basically the reverse is the case in his cosmos, where basically like the people of Eastside or whatever is going on there are like creations or projections of humanity from either the last universe or the next universe, or maybe
Mhm.
those are the same thing,
Yep.
who out of their love are actually trying to uplift humanity so that then they'll be created, as opposed to, yeah, so it's actually the kind of the reverse of this trope. Yeah.
Because I mean, because Gene Wolfe is he understands all this stuff and he's playing with that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
my
yeah.
point is that that I'm not sure how conscious this mythic resonance is in this modern science fiction. Now, this Tchaikovsky's trilogy is just an example, but there's a lot of this kind of mythic resonance that's going on, especially in post-apocalyptic near future sci-fi, but
Yeah.
the far future stuff too. Warhammer 40K is a great example. It's like the flip universe, right? Where what if the universe were created by a dark god, and you needed to have a tyrannical church structure, because if you didn't, everybody would be, sucked into the vortex
Yes.
of
I hear
hell.
somebody describe Warhammer as something like you're siding with the Nazis against Cthulhu, something like that.
Yeah. So
Um,
it's really fascinating to me, because I think they're letting, so in telling these kinds of stories, uh, what's going on is it's revealing the limitations of this worldview. Is that any uh, science fiction as a genre, and space opera in particular, has always had kind of mythic elements to it,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
it's coming up to the edge of what it's able to do with the current materialistic new atheist kind of mindset. And the only thing that's beyond it is to tell stories that are mythic in nature, in the way that the old myths were. So we're kind of coming back all the way
Yeah.
to the beginning in some ways, but it's also revealing the fact that the genre that was supposed to be about human potential in exploring the vastness is actually a very, very depressing and very dark view of both the cosmos and human nature. And I think that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, that's to me, that's what kind of brought about the Lovecraft comparison, because there's this kind of at the end of atheism, like there is this kind of a really bleak uh you could call it like ontological pessimism, something like that. Just like, oh, there is more to the cosmos than you think there is, and it's all terrible, like it's all horrible, it all wants to eat you, right? And yeah, I mean, so the thing is, like, when you were like giving me the plot, like I'm so used to this, like running across the sort of thing in science fantasy, that I basically like knew every single thing you were going to say. And I don't mean in that way that's like a bad story or anything like that. I haven't read it. Sounds great. Sounds like I would probably enjoy it. But it is a very but that's the sort of the move that I would expect right now. That's what I'm trying
Mhm.
to say. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, totally, totally. And what's interesting though is that this move, it's a natural one. It's an interesting one, but it's also one in which, so it's rubbing up against the limits of the worldview, but it's also willing to consider what is beyond its
Yeah.
own limitations.
Yeah.
Well, fantasy is stuck in virtue signaling, and
I see what you're saying. I see
yeah,
what you're saying.
yeah, which is unexpected to me, because I'm coming. I'll explain the reason why this is surprising me. It's because I come towards science fiction from an Orson Scott Card perspective. He's sort of my entry into science fiction,
Mm.
and Orson Scott Card is a very, as somebody who comes out of the establishment, right? Even though he's a Mormon, um, eh, kind of the inheritor of the golden age in a lot of ways. He's very strict about defining the limits of what science fiction can do.
Yeah,
Like, you
yeah, yeah.
cannot have the presence of the ineffable or transcendent in science fiction by definition, according to Orson
Right,
Scott
right,
Card.
right, right,
You
right. Yeah.
cannot. If you do, you mess up, and it's not science fiction anymore. And so much so that when he rewrote the Book of Mormon in a science fiction setting, which a series called Homecoming, which if you haven't read it, you should read it
Mm.
just for the weirdness of it. It's a really interesting story. Not a very good. It's not his best, but it's just interesting to see. Like, anyway, that's a different conversation. But even there, because it's science fiction, he has to replace God with an all-knowing computer. And even in the end, when the actual divinity that runs the universe is revealed, it's more like Gaia. It's described more like an animate Earth, or an Earth with a, not that the Earth is animate itself, but that there's an element to the planet that transcends the material, but is still um, definable by physical processes.
Mm.
And he refuses to go beyond that. Like, there is no incursion of the divine, even though this is the Book of Mormon in space,
Yeah.
literally.
I
Um,
mean, so I actually never really liked Orson Scott Card for all the reasons you just said. Like,
okay.
I did. My wife was like really into the Ender series for a little while, and so like we read them all together. I was just kind of like, yeah, you know, okay, like I get it. Ender's a little kid who's really good at killing people. I get, I get the thing now. Like we don't have to keep, but
I like Speaker for the Dead. I thought that was a really good novel. But
yeah, yeah. I mean, was sort of like a good novel on its own merits, but as a whole, like I just didn't really care for the whole series. Now, for me, I sort of grew up like watching all the stars, mainly, not really actually so much Star Wars, which wasn't really a thing in my house growing up, but a lot of Star Trek, a lot of Stargate, um, uh, but also reading a lot of like Sword and Planet stuff, a lot of Larry Niven, RimWorld, all this stuff, and like even like Jack Vance's Dying Earth, stuff like that. So like to me, that's really the for me, that kind of thing is where the juice is, right? And so in that sense, it's much more like fantasy in space, and like it's sort of like, well, there might be a scientific explanation for the magic, but who cares really, kind of an approach. So it is pretty different. Hard sci-fi has not ever really been it's just never really been my thing.
It's funny that you mentioned Larry Niven, because Ringworld is about as hard sci-fi as you can get.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
it does have space opera elements to it, but
yeah, but it also inspires like a lot of really out there space opera later on. So yeah,
his own and others, right? Because there are other writers wrote in that universe later on, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I never got past the first one.
I ran to talk about tabletop gaming for a minute, because it's one of my favorite ways to tell stories. Part of the reason that I like it is just because of the immediacy of the audience. Like, and you're just like doing this for a small group of people, and you get immediate feedback, and like when the story is working, you can tell, and when it's not working, you can also tell, right? And it's just sort of like, but I ran a space opera campaign using a system called Fading Suns, which, as the name probably implies, has elements of Gene Wolfe, and also elements of Niven, and elements of like a few other things as well. And really like all of that stuff, including the Warhammer 40,000 universe, which is basically just riffing off of those authors I just mentioned. I mean, you can find stuff in Warhammer 40,000, like literally names of things on models that are, like there's an executioner with a sword named Terminus Est. Like it's, yeah. Warhammer 40,000 is like very blatant in the way that sort of like rips things off.
That's funny.
And
it was supposed to be initially basically a massive work of satire, right? Because it's coming from that kind of British Red Dwarf tradition.
I mean, people say this. I don't think satire is quite right.
Okay.
I don't think it's like, I don't think it's just that they're trying to satirize something. I mean, it really starts out as here's like a funny miniatures game, right? And like, don't take this too seriously. And then of course, immediately people did not follow instructions, took it very seriously, and there's literally like thousands of Warhammer novels now. Like it's just, and most of them are kind of terrible. A few of them are actually really good, and you're like, this would be a really good work of like sci-fi, unattached from the Warhammer 40,000 universe, like the Eisenhorn books, for instance. But anyway,
Eisenhorn books are good. They're the only ones that really caught my attention. Yeah, they're good.
They're really good, but there's some other ones that are also really good, and it's just like, it really just depends on the author that you get. I feel the same way about like the Timothy Zahn Star Wars novels.
I can't read Zahn. He's too his style is too transparent. Like it's like no style to it.
I really enjoyed his basically sequel trilogy before that was a thing. I really enjoyed those books. Thrawn trilogy, or whatever you want to call them.
The first one, right? Because he wrote a second Thrawn trilogy, didn't he?
Yeah. No, this is the first one. I haven't read any of his more recent stuff, but I enjoy those books sort of just as like, these are fun space opera books.
Yeah.
And even if you don't really care about Star Wars. Where was I going with this? So I ran this game called Fading Suns, and one of the things that I wanted to, so one of the things that's implicit in the setting, in the Fading Sun setting, is that all the stars are going out.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of nobody knows exactly why, and the setting itself does not tell you why. Mm-hmm. And so you can decide to either just like have it as a background thing, or you could like make it a part of your campaign, but then you'd have to come up with a reason. So I did kind of come up with a reason. I put together a cosmology that was really based on so the church in the Fading Sun setting is called the Earth URTH, Earth Orthodox Church. And it has a space pope, and it has like all these other things. But he's called the Patriarch of Earth. And anyway, so I took like a lot of this stuff and I kind of put together so I would start each session with a bit of found text from the setting that I wrote myself.
Yeah.
And but basically I made like a space Synaxarion, and
That's
I
awesome.
would and I read quotes from it at the start of each session. And I came across this today as I was just going through random stuff in my Evernote, like all the little excerpts that I've written in, and a lot of it was like stuff from the Space Synaxarion, or like here's inscriptions from coffin lids and things like this. And the idea was that if if the players were being really attentive, they could actually string all of these things together and start to unravel the mystery of why the stars are going out. And
Cool.
uh the players were not attentive, so nothing ever came of it. But I knew.
But you knew.
Yeah, but I mean, one of the things that I really wanted to do was to sort of, even in the ruins of what you could call like a post-apocalyptic setting, or like a technological dark age, or whatever you want to call it. Like basically we're doing the dark ages in space, or we're doing the
Yeah.
it's kind of after the glory days of humanity, and spacefaring and the empire, and like whatever, all that stuff is kind of like crumbled and collapsed.
Yeah.
And now the stars are going out and nobody knows why. And what I wanted to do was to create a setting where there is that sort of sense of helplessness, but then also the cosmos is still sort of eschatologically hopeful. And so anyway, that's
Okay,
this is
so how
yeah.
did you do that? Like what elements in the storytelling itself allow for that to happen? Because my part of my point is that this mode of storytelling is something that's very attractive to people because of the fall of Western Civ around us as we speak, right? But their inevitable takeaway is that it's all going to pot anyway. So the best you can do is kind of, found family, or hedonism, or la 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 something, right? So
Yeah.
how do you then make it hopeful?
Right. I mean, so actually, I will answer that question, but I wanted to go back to a thought I had a moment ago, which is the reason that materialists are telling stories like this now
Yeah.
is the same reason you have like Richard Dawkins saying,
Yeah. Well,
"I'm
yeah.
culturally a Christian," right? It's the
Yes.
same. It's the
That
same
that that
impulse.
was my
It's like
implicit point, yes.
it's like, oh no, we've suddenly realized what happens if the world is listening to us,
I mean,
and it's
it's
really
it's
bad.
it's the it's the fact how in Christopher Hitchens' days, it would have been, a hall in Glasgow or with him and John Lennox yelling at each other, and now it's Alex O'Connor asking Jonathan on his channel and genuinely, like, asking questions that he really wants to know the answer to,
Yeah.
that it's a totally different paradigm.
Yeah, it's a crazy world. So what I did, and this is even in like some of my like superhero universe, which I will someday return to. Um,
Yes, you will, and we're gonna talk
it,
about that later.
it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. But uh, it's sort of this idea that, and first of all, this is like a thing. You've seen that meme going around maybe where it's like, and I think they're using like SpongeBob images, but it's like here's the what other religions version of hell and other religions version of heaven, and then Orthodox hell is like bailiffs show him the true face of God, and Orthodox heaven is like bailiffs show him the true face of God. And so the sort of the direction I went with it in in my superhero universe first, and then like still playing with this idea throughout other works of speculative fiction that I've written, or like settings I've built to run games and things like that over the years, is to say, actually, yes, the you wouldn't want to draw the curtain back, right? Like, because if you did draw the curtain back, you would die. But it's not because it's ugly and malicious and hates you and wants to eat you,
Yes.
but it's actually because it's terrible or awful in the old sense of those words,
Yeah.
right? It's something that's too beautiful and it's too much. It's too much for you. And so in that sense, the curtain is a mercy. And this is, I think, a pretty orthodox idea,
Yeah.
right? Is why we have the curtain, to
Yep.
begin with, like
Yep.
even in the service, right? And that there is, so the thing that you're always moving towards in storytelling, and when you can get there with players who are sort of like, tabletop storytelling is different because you're not the only author, right? And so you have other people who are actually also bringing their own agency into things. But if you have sort of a well enough developed cosmology, what will happen is that the players will, through their own agency and their own decisions, they'll start to peer back behind the curtain just like a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And so what you're always building towards is actually this eschatological moment where something really beautiful, usually something none of you actually planned on happening,
Oh, that's cool.
breaks into the story, and you have this moment of light or joy or
Yeah,
holiness or
you
beauty.
catastrophe that, but that's
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
fantasy supposed to be. This
yes,
is the
I know.
structure of fantasy.
But you have that moment sort of like, but in a tabletop game, like it just breaks in organically,
Yeah.
and usually because all of the players' decisions up to this point have led to something really bad happening, and then there's a turn. And
Oh,
that turn
that's
happens
awesome.
when that turn happens, not because you tried to make it happen, but because sort of like, there's a mantra in tabletop gaming, the dice tell a story,
Mhm.
right? Where it's like, well, we want it, and the point is that there's an element of randomness, so there's like all these variables you can't control, and it's
Yeah.
very usually novelists make very bad uh game masters because they're trying to like control all the variables.
Yes.
But if you can sort of like take yourself out of those variables, or basically take yourself out of the mindset where I want to control all of these things,
Yeah.
and sort of like let stuff unfold as it's going to unfold, and then you kind of take the job of, I'm going to be an impartial adjudicator, or an impartial like sort of judge, and say, based on this world that has these laws and these rules, and this is the way the world is, here's what would happen. That's when you can see something really beautiful unfold. But anyway,
Cool.
so I say all this to say what I did in my sort of science fantasy or space opera or whatever you want to call it, what I did was to I sort of built a plot, and I built a cosmology around some like mostly like Jewish mysticism and like early Christian mysticism of like the seven heavens and things like this. But basically, I had this idea that there was these seven worlds
Mm.
that have been sealed behind jump gates, and a very similar thing, by the way. Like the idea, the your description of hyperspace travel is like pretty normal for um
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like for the genre, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, no,
so
I know that, yeah. Yeah,
so
I just wanted to be
they have
I just wanted to describe it technically
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
there's an
So they
element to it that's similar to what of to the kind of light matter, dark matter thing, which I think is an interesting
yeah, 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 yeah.
scientific point to just to explore in story form, I think.
Yeah. So the invading suns, the way that they sort of get around like unsafe travel is these jump gates, but nobody knows who made the jump gates, or the jump gates were made by sort of left there by a previous civilization. And if you go through one unprotected, so they have these like field generators basically in the ships that allow
Uh-huh.
you to safely go from jump gate to jump
Okay,
gate.
so instead of, like, going to sleep and
Right.
going into a stasis pod, you create
Yeah.
one from the ship, kind of.
Yeah, well, you don't need a stasis pod because you're not because jump gate travel, but travel between jump gates is basically instantaneous.
Okay.
So it
So
might
it's
take
not
you
relatively it's actually instantaneous as opposed to
yes.
in
So
relative.
right, so it might take you like 7 days to get from the planet you're on to where the nearest jump gate is,
Yeah,
traveling at not quite relativistic speeds,
right.
right? Because the jump gates were left by a previous alien civilization,
Yeah,
or who knows who left them, but they did not always leave them in the most convenient places. But
right,
if you get to your so it might take you a week to get to your nearest jump gate.
right.
But then once you pass through it, like the trip between one side and the other is almost instantaneous.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
It takes like maybe a few hours.
Okay.
And so to make that jump, you need this field generator that basically protects you from the effects of the jump gate. And if you go through it, it's actually illegal in the setting to go through the jump gate without that protection.
Mhm.
And so much so that there are people on board every jump capable ship whose sole job it is to make sure nobody deactivates the field, because deactivating the field, basically if you go through a jump gate without you experience this, and there's like a whole cult around this called Sathrism, um, named after the guy that started it, and basically like doing unprotected jumps in order to because the experience is this experience of like high euphoria,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's like sort of like
So it's the opposite of the one I'm
yeah, it's the
talking about.
opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's the opposite of what you're describing there. But it's this experience of high euphoria that eventually drives you insane,
Right, right,
because
because
it's like
either
so
experience is an
yeah,
extreme and can
it's
drive
like
you
too
crazy.
beautiful, or it's
Yeah,
too
yeah.
something, or Um, so anyway, what I so I kind of put the story together with these like different 7 different worlds, and each of the worlds also kind of corresponds to like one of the ages of man and all this stuff. And anyway, it was very complex. Um, and sadly, and I planned to run it for 7 real-time years.
Nice.
And sadly, which is not unusual for me. Like I've run games that have lasted.
That's very ambitious, but yeah.
I've run games that have lasted like 16 years, and so this is not at all like unusual. I mean, think about the kind of story you could tell if you were just building with the same group of people for 7 years.
Yeah, it'd be
like but unfortunately, because of some things that happen in life, we never got past year 3. So I still have it.
There's some symbolism in there too, eh?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So never got past the 3rd age of man, which is the flood. So anyway, maybe one of these days we'll get back to it. But yeah. So but I would say this is true for like any kind of a setting that I'm building, whether it's science fiction or a fantasy setting, is one of the things that seems to me to be like really fundamentally true, and that I want to make true in the worlds that I build, is this idea that actually beyond if you draw back the veil, what is there is actually really beautiful. And it's only kind of out here in the space between the stars, you could say, like that's where the darkness is, but that's not the real. That's not the truth about reality. That's just sort of, I mean, because I think there is this impulse, and this is what Lewis, I just started a reread of his Cosmic Trilogy literally today, because I'm about to do a kind of like a 3-month conversation about it with Seraphim. Orthodox YouTuber. Hamilton. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Simply spaced out. Because so we're gonna do several conversations about the Cosmic Trilogy.
Cool.
But one of the things he's really pushing back against in his first book in specific is the idea of space, right? And so what he's trying to do is get you to think about the heavens rather than
totally. I mean, it's a point that Michael Ward makes again and again and again in Planet Narnia. I love that, and I'm going to be trying to write into that with my next project, which is one of the reasons why we're talking about this right now. But to move the conversation a little bit and talk about something else that I wanted to talk with you about, and that's something that I noticed in recent conversations that Jonathan was having with aforementioned hard-nosed atheists, Alex O'Connor and Peter Boghossian. Did you listen to those conversations, by the way?
I did. It was really vexing, but yes.
It was I was vexed at first.
Jonathan has a special charism to do the things that he does.
Yes, that is
absolutely I would not be up to those conversations.
No. That, I mean, you've put, that's exactly right. And and I think he might actually get through to some of them. And it's astounding to me, because I'm listening to it and I'm like, why aren't you doing this or this or this? And then I can hear, like, in their voices, there's like this little mini illumination. I'm like, how did he do that?
Little changes, yeah.
It's really, but I mean, it's really nice to see how open they are to it. But okay, so there's one thing that really interested me, and I saw this noticed this in conversations that he had with Vervaeke too, and that's this unwillingness to consider the classic what if sci-fi scenario in conversations about the way things actually are, right? So there was Boghossian asked him about something about like insectoid humans, or like instead of humans, like if the Earth had, or if a planet had evolved in such a way that there was an insectoid sentient race, would Christ be an insect, right? It was something like this, right? Yeah. And then with Alex O'Connor, it was like, what, could it have happened that Adam and Eve didn't eat the apple, right? So like these what if scenarios,
right? Yeah,
which are, and with Vervaeke, it was like the talks about this, the silicon sages, right? Which, immediately John's like, okay, we're cutting that off. We're not talking about this. And he refuses to admit, to sort of consider the possibility of these things in real life.
Yeah.
But he goes so far as to even kind of shut down discussion about it in a way that I thought might be interesting in a kind of sci-fi storytelling way.
Yeah.
So what do you think's going on there? Like, is he right to do this?
I mean, you got to remember that Jonathan is writing a graphic novel series where Saint Christopher literally has the head of a dog. So I don't think he's averse to speculative fiction per se, and I mean Lewis will say, and you can't always totally trust authors when they give like their internal story of why they wrote their thing. Tolkien, for instance, is pretty unreliable, I think, in that regard. But Lewis does say that one of the things behind Narnia is the idea of like, what if there was a world where like it, talking beasts instead of humans as the
No, I
main
mean
sort of
he does the
sentient.
what if scenario.
Right, and so Lewis really likes that what if, and he likes that idea. It's a line in Paralandra, and it's almost a throwaway line, but then Lewis liked it so much that later on he made it the basis of. Have you read Lewis's short story about the moon landing?
No.
Oh yeah. I'm trying to remember which anthology of his this is in, and I'll just give you the spoilers version of it.
Okay.
These guys get to the moon, land on the moon. They're in astronaut gear. They're walking around, and they meet Medusa, who lives on the moon, and they get turned to stone. And this is everything. Lewis said many times in his life, if we ever get to the moon, that'll be disastrous, and wanted to have nothing to do with actual space travel.
Yeah.
But the throwaway line that from Paralandra is this idea. It's something like that: what was mythology in one world might be reality in another.
Yeah.
And that's the underlying idea of Narnia.
Yes.
So that it's not just that things from our world are real in Narnia. It's that things from our it's not just that mythology from our world is real in Narnia. It's that real things in our world are Narnian mythology.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
Father Christmas is a fact.
Yeah.
But then there's a book, in Mr. Tumnus's library called Men, Monks, Gamekeepers, and Other Legends. Right?
Huh.
Well, you got to think about like, if you're in a world of talking beasts, then monks are like fairies. They're good fairies. And gamekeepers are evil fairies, right? These super powerful beings that like kind of swoop in and take your young away and do all these things.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Whereas monks are like, why monks? Because in all the old stories, monks are the friends of the beasts.
Right, because the beasts come to them. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, not just the old stories and the current stories, but anyway. And so like Men, Monks, Gamekeepers, and Other Legends, right? That's a book in Mr. Tumnus's library. Whereas you also have The Life of Silenus, which is, Silenus is like, a man from our mythology. But in Mr. Tumnus's library, that's like Boswell's Life of Johnson. Like that's like this, here's a stolid tome of a biography about a person that everybody knows to be a historical reality. So that's like, actually, Mr. Tumnus's bookshelf, sometimes Lewis gets ragged on, I think, unfairly for his world building with Narnia, and it's actually a lot
with
more
the hodgepodge nature of it.
But it's actually much more deliberate than people realize it is. And
Michael Ward says the same thing. Yeah,
Mr. Tumnus's library is one of my favorite examples of this, and I think it's very under. People don't pay enough attention to it. Like,
clearly I did.
but anyway, so oh gosh, where was I going with this?
We're talking about Jonathan's unwillingness to go into the what if.
Yeah, so I think that the what if scenario is definitely the right kind of impulse, you could say, for like writing speculative fiction, but maybe
the reason I'm asking this is because these writers that you're talking about specifically are writing speculative fiction on the what ifs to make a point about reality.
Yeah,
they're not just doing it to have fun, although that's part of it. They're not doing it because it's a flight of fancy. I mean, that's more like the kind of bizarre out there science fiction that you find in a lot of the anthologies where what ifs are more materialistic and more scientific. They're not theological, but these kinds of what ifs are theological, but they go into kind of the storytelling space of speculative fiction. And I would have thought that this would be an interesting approach to be able to talk about such things with people who refuse to.
So my guess, and I haven't talked to Jonathan about this specifically. I did talk to him about those conversations, but I haven't I haven't asked him this question specifically. But my intuition, and I say this as an intuition because I would do the same way if I was having, like, you could say, like an apologetic discussion with an atheist who was like, okay, but what if Jesus was a woman, or like something like that,
Right.
I'd be like, but that's not what happened. Let's
Yeah.
talk about what actually happened. Like,
Yeah.
let's talk about the way that the world actually is, because
Yeah.
that's the thing that's really. Now, I do agree with you that speculative fiction is a really useful way to kind of come at this sort of sideways. But I'm not sure that I would engage. Like, the thing is, like, if I'm writing a story, then it's like, okay, things are going to be a little more thought out, and we're also going to have the a story comes with if I put something out there in a novel, it's in a sort of, you could say, like, non-binding framework. So nobody is saying that by reading this novel, you've now agreed to all of my premises and you accept my worldview.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas within debate or within argumentation,
Yes.
there is kind of the sense that if you say, accept my premise, once you've accepted the premise, it's like, aha, I have that on you,
Yes,
and now
that's
you
true. I mean,
have to sort of like go with
that's
it.
especially true of situations where it's an actual debate. But
Right.
what struck me about both these conversations that they were trying to avoid the debate format, and this was more of a conversation of pushing at the limits of each other's understanding and trying to legitimately understand what the other person believes. All right,
Yeah.
let me try a thought on you, and you tell me what you think. Okay, so I was playing devil's advocate, and I was suggesting why not? Why doesn't Jonathan do that? Because my impulse would have been to do that. And in fact, a lot of my storytelling impulses come from similar types of what ifs, and I'm not the only one. There's a great First Things article called Science Friction, which I will recommend to people who are watching now and later, that talks about how um, writers of both of faith and not faith are exploring different what if scenarios with the intention of kind of uh, with the storytelling intention of seeing what does that mean for what it means to be alive here now, not as in some kind of abstraction out there, but like, what stories are supposed to do. And so my impulse would have been to go along with Bogosian's question and say, well, what about this, and like this, what would this mean with the but then what I realized is these kinds of stories with the what if scenarios, they're most effective for people who share your worldview already. So
That was literally the next thing that I was gonna say.
yeah, and this is really interesting because I think Narnia is effective because it was written in a time when most people would at least be aware of the worldview, even if they didn't share it, because they're stewing in it, right?
That's right.
While someone like Neil Gaiman, who's on the kind of fringe between the time when people were still in it and were no longer in it at all, read it, loved it, and as soon as he realized what was going on, hated it.
I would go so far as to say that an atheist who went to school with Lewis shares more of Lewis's worldview than the average evangelical does today.
I mean, there you go. Okay, so this is really interesting, right? Then then these stories, these what kind of what if scenarios,
Yep.
they're not going to work because even your intended audience. So you have to do the work of setting the world first
Yep.
before you can do the what if. So what I'm suggesting is maybe you need to go back and recreate the worldview you're through the storytelling medium itself, which
So
means make science fiction geocentric and medieval cosmological as opposed to deep space is what I'm
so
saying.
this is the and actually, like, even in my own fantasy work, like in the World Under Starlight, part of the project has been, for me, about recapturing a specific social imaginary
Yeah.
For myself. And so because of that, I put zero work into trying to, and in fact, this thing I'm doing right now on my YouTube channel, The Midnight War, is the very first time that I've ever invited a whole bunch of people into like a long form story in the setting. And really what I've been doing up to this point has been to do exactly what you said, which is to rebuild a cosmological model
Mm,
which has space to tell this kind of story.
yeah.
Because every time I've sat down, uh, just because there isn't space to think like this anymore. And this is why, I mean, I remember having a really interesting conversation with somebody who said, you know, So it was at like a classical educators uh like internships practicum kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And we were sitting around and talking about, what does it mean for a book to be a great book? You know?
Yeah.
And I think that, one of the main measures of this is like, will people read this in
Yeah.
100,
Yeah.
200,
Yeah.
300
I mean,
years, right?
that's what Umberto Eco would say, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I think he's right about that. But and he said, I'm honestly not sure people will read Narnia in 100 years.
Yeah.
And I, of course, that you wound me, sir. You wound me. But I kind of agree. Like, I do think there's a certain amount of like Narnia really only works if you're already steeped enough in, you could say, not just Christianity, but in the Western
Yeah.
the Western inheritance, the shared Western cultural inheritance,
Yes.
to be like, to I mean, even like the little sort of in jokes about like growing up in the English public school experience and everything, which means something totally different in England than it
Yep.
means here, and things like that.
Yep.
Like that's really the person Narnia is for.
Yes.
And then and in that sense, like, it's really helpful to help somebody who's really struggling with the loss of their faith, which is what everybody in that culture from Lewis's time is struggling with, is,
Yes.
the
Yes.
end of the world, World War One, World War Two,
Right.
the loss of faith, etc. Really helpful for them to come back to that in a kind of a sideways way
Right.
and meet Christ again.
Right.
And I don't
Rather than find meaning from essentially nothing, which is what
right,
most people are doing right now.
right. And then, but I don't know that that'll work on somebody that like a Zoomer. I don't know if it'll work on. And you'll find, I mean, obviously, like, if your kids are raised in a Narnia house, they're gonna like
Right.
Narnia,
Right.
etc. But like I don't know if you just sort of gave the average Zoomer right now The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe,
No, they wouldn't. I mean, they wouldn't
like,
get it. They
yeah,
wouldn't get
like,
it.
I don't know if they'd pick up on it. I don't know if they'd understand it. I'm deeply fearful of the network, the Netflix Narnia
You know
project.
what? I'm more sanguine. I'm
I
more sanguine about this.
I mean, that's a wild and unsupportable position, but I appreciate your I appreciate your optimism.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I think she's a wild card. I don't. I mean,
She's a wild
could
card, but I
she
think
could
she's
make
gonna
this
go.
into a total abomination, but I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, I
I
really liked her Little Women, but
I loved Little Women.
Little Women was the movie she was supposed to make, though, and I
I mean,
really,
this was the movie of her heart.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I really don't know that she's gonna do a version of Narnia, let's say, that is going to be made for me.
No, but it might do the thing that you're hoping
Yeah.
that you think the Zoomers can't do. It might do the thing for the Zoomers that
Yeah,
Narnia
maybe,
can't do.
maybe you're right. Maybe
And
you're right.
that's not an argument for making the film.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not saying that's a
I
reason
understand.
why it should be made or why we should watch it. But I maybe that could happen. I don't know because she's
I
not a Zoomer.
understand, yeah.
She's a millennial, and Zoomers don't like millennials with good reason.
That's
But
all.
okay, so
Yeah,
this is an interesting place, and I think we should stop it here,
yeah,
just because we could talk about this forever. But the final thought after all this is something like this. So the question that I've been working through is just noticing the fact that space opera and sci-fi in general nowadays is going towards a place of meaning, but that they keep getting tripped up in, as you say, the place behind the veil being nothing but monsters,
right,
nothing but monsters, or something like a maleficent will, and it gets expressed in modern genres in a lot of different ways, like the Earth coming back, kind of becoming sentient and attacking its inhabitants for exploiting it. That's something that happens in the Broken Earth in N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth series. It's very effective. It's really good. That sort of thing usually I can't stand, but she does it really, really, really well. Or uh, kind of like swarming alien intelligences that overtake your will as a kind of possession, which is something that appears in another Adrian Tchaikovsky book, or the Leviathans in the deep, but expressed in kind of modern scientific dark matter language. And or the one that really gets me is Tom Sweterlich's Gone Earth, which is something you should read. It's really, really good. It has a very serious encounter with Hans Holbein's Christ, uh, in a way that consciously echoes Dostoevsky, but tries to give the opposite answer.
oh geez.
Yes. Um, right?
I don't know if this is the right time in life to read that, but that sounds like the sort of thing like you need to sort of fortify yourself for before you
Oh,
go
you
into that.
really do. It's
Yeah.
very bracing. But once you read it, you realize there's impulse. There's impulse to not to make meaning out of nothing, which is that the flip side of this, the kind of solipsistic. I'm creating my own universe, and since the universe is relativistic anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to create the best version of it for myself, and I'm going to do whatever I want with it. Which is one side. The other side is no, there is meaning. Let's find it. Oh crap. It's huge, it's impersonal, and it hates us and it wants to eat us. So let's try to pretend like it doesn't exist, right? And this is the substrate now. This is the worldview substrate that everybody's operating under. So to be able to tell the kinds of transformative stories that we want to tell, because not because we're trying to convert the universe necessarily, but because we want to share the joy that we have in living, right? You have to reconstruct that worldview through a storytelling medium. And Jonathan is probably right in that you don't follow the traditional what if, because the traditional what if has come up against the limits of its imagination. And the limits of that imagination are the Leviathans in the deep, the Lovecraftian monster. So instead, we have to kind of reanimate space by not making it space, but by making it a light-filled cosmos. The reason I'm talking about this is because that's sort of the direction that I'm personally going in with my next project. And those of you who are watching this, I'm in pre-order for the Kickstarter for Cantos of Arcadia, which is the first entry into this.
I didn't even know you were doing this, dude.
Hello.
Thanks a lot, algorithm.
Yeah, Facebook's been really bad, but I've been holding off on my hello, help me out thing because I've been doing that a lot. So I'm holding off on this for now.
You
gotta,
as
soon as it launches, I'm going to start bothering people.
At least just like text a brother and let
me know. No, I
will,
will, but it's still in pre-launch. So
okay.
Right now I've gotten enough people to sign up for the pre-launch notification that I'm happy. But as soon as this thing goes live, then cool. So that's one of the reasons why I'm thinking about this. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you, Richard, because you oftentimes put words succinctly to thoughts that I'm having, and that's a lovely thing. And of course, it's always just a pleasure to talk to you. And we haven't talked in a while, so we wanted just.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. I've been itching actually myself to write some space opera lately. I sort of like actually want to adapt a Viking saga for space opera, which I think would be a ton of fun. So no idea when I'll ever find time to do that. But, sometimes you just blow work off and write.
Yeah, I'm going to have to like trap you in something and attach a money value to it, like force you to give me a bunch of money and then put the structure around you.
Do it.
And since you've paid for it, you have no other choice.
Yeah, that's probably... Oh man, I think you just described like a reality show. Something like
Unfortunately, I've just described reality as it actually works.
Put a novelist,
we get anything done.
Put a novelist in a box, like you have to write 100,000 words to get yourself out of here.
A beautiful cabin in the Adirondacks. It doesn't have to be a box. I can set it up for you, man. No problem.
That would be incredible. Yeah, the Adirondacks is like one of the... I'm sort of trying to hit all the North American mountain ranges, and that's one of the ones that I have.
There's a thing right about hitting all the peaks in the Adirondacks. There's an actual.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure I'm up to that because I get terrible altitude sickness past a certain level. And I tried Pikes Peak several times, and like past a certain level,
is tough.
Past a certain level, I just get horribly sick, horribly.
No, it's. I mean, it's hard to drive that much, less walk it. I mean, good grief.
But I don't get like normal altitude sickness. It affects me other places.
Existentially.
No, just mostly in my bowels. It's which does feel kind of existential. Like it's your bowels are.
Yeah, I suppose so.
In the Old Testament, your bowels really are the most.
That's true. Very Aryan. Oh
yeah.
Oh dear. Yeah. And on that very lovely note, we've talked about cannibals. We've talked about bowel movements being indicative of existential crises. Hey, this is what we do. Thanks, everyone. You might see us talking about other things in the near future, even though Richard is clearly resistant. But we shall have to see about that.
Wait, what am I resistant about? I don't.
Rings of Power.
Oh. I mean, for friendship, I might try to suffer through it. I
tell you what. I'll watch the first episode.
Okay.
And that will be the determining factor.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everybody.
Cantos of Arcadia. Check it out. Put it in Kickstarter. It'll be in the thingy to this thingy. La la la.
The doobly-doo.
Yeah, that thing. So sign up for pre-launch because then you'll hear about when it's live and you can help me do that cool thing when we say launched in X amount of time. So that's always fun. All right, everybody, have a good evening. Have a good weekend. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.